Hooray,
Boom.
it worked.
It worked. It's at
First
the
time.
ending, isn't it? You're waiting for it to stop, and you
Yeah.
thinking, um,
Is it going to
"Good
happen?
morning." Good morning. It's not the morning, is it?
Good evening.
Thank you, Chris, for reminding me what time it is. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Open Minds. Do excuse me, I have a lozenge because have a bit of a horsey throat at the moment, due to staying out and partying last night, so my voice is a bit husky. Welcome, Chris. How are you doing?
I'm good. Really good. Yeah, I'm doing good. What
Stop
else can we
sniffing them.
say?
Ah,
I'm fine
and
and dandy.
as you can see, everybody, this week on Open Minds, I have Chris in a cupboard somewhere in the universe. Chris is in a cupboard. Um, so, Chris, how's the mediumship going? You've got these a lot of events coming up, haven't you?
I have, yeah, one on the 20th,
Mm-hmm.
one on the 29th. Yeah, quite a few. Then I've got some more I've got to book in. Really good. The one on,
Brilliant.
don't even know, I never know
I
what day
mean,
of the week it is.
well,
But the
I'm
other
not
day
surprised. I'm not
was really
surprised the
nice.
world you live in. So, Chris, I was
It's
just going to
really
say,
nice.
for those local to you,
Yeah,
and they want to book, do they just get hold of you on the Facebook page?
yeah, Chris Shearer Medium. I'm on there. I'm on Instagram as well. So
Okay.
you can find me there. So yeah,
Okay.
send me a message.
Yeah.
Don't say
Send him a
anything.
message. Yeah. Nice one, preferably a nice one. Okay.
Please, yeah.
Now we've got past that. As I said, I am eating a lozenge. I do apologise. I chatted so much last night. I've lost my voice. Today we have a wonderful guest, and I just smile when I think of his name. Um, and but before we go to our wonderful guest next week, Chris Shearer, we have the one and only Rob Gauthier, don't we?
We do channeling for
Channeling. And next week, because Rob channels at a certain time in the day, Open Minds will be at 8:30 p.m. UK time. We're later next Sunday, and also due to do with the time zone in the part of the USA that Rob is in. So me and Chris are really looking forward to next week as well, aren't we, sweetie? We're going to have our questions ready for Ardif and
definitely.
Trek. So, without further ado, would you really like to invite our wonderful guest, Robert, out of the naughty room?
Certainly. Good evening or good morning. I'm not quite sure, but hello, Robert. Thanks for
Yes,
joining us.
yeah, it's afternoon where I'm at.
Oh, God, you have to be picky, don't you, Robert?
Yes, I do.
No,
Coming
welcome.
coming from New Jersey in America.
Well, welcome to the show, Robert. So,
Thank you.
as you're aware, what the show's about, and we invite our guests on to come and share their spiritual journey and where it's led them and opens them up to. I'm not going to give away what I'm aware that you've gone into, i.e., Steiner at the end. But could you start, Robert, at the beginning? Where did your spiritual journey begin? Was it childhood, or was there paranormal moments, or was there an awakening, or where did it begin for you?
Yeah, well, actually I was thinking about this because I knew that this was kind of the topic for today. And the first experience I had that was a bit unusual was when I was probably 3 or 4 years old, and I had a period where I had intense hearing. I was open to sound to the degree that if anyone made even a slight noise, it was like there was drums going off next to my ear.
Wow.
It was as if I was looking back on, as if I was adjusting to an, this sensory world, and I wasn't. It wasn't when I was 2 or 3. I think it was 4 or 5 years of age. But that's kind of the first memory that stands out, and I hadn't thought about that for a long time. As we talked about in other shows, when I was 9 years old, I had visitations over a period of about 3 weeks, as best I can estimate, by mantid beings, and it was what is now a kind of standard, or I guess you could say almost ordinary experience of mantid beings. if that could ever be considered ordinary,
Mm-hmm.
in which I had. I physically saw them. They came into my bedroom.
Mm-hmm.
I don't recall being abducted. I think there was more inputting of information, visuals of a nuclear war, visuals of ecological disasters,
Mm-hmm.
which, later on, that's what a lot of experiencers talk about. So in that sense, it kind of fits in with, a lot of the other literature that's out there. But I mean, it was a horrifying experience for me. But I think back and I kind of feel what it was like. I wasn't afraid of the beings themselves. They didn't seem to want to do me harm. But it was, I was 9 years old. It was terrifying. I hadn't been afraid of the dark or anything before then, or had any major fears or since, really. One unusual thing, I guess, is that I really, as far as I remember, I haven't had any further contact with of that kind. But that was pretty extraordinary. Later on, obviously, I linked it up with the UFO abduction literature, the experiencer literature, and could have a frame of reference to understand it. But it was definitely focused on the future, and some horrible events. It's something. Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry to talk over you. With other experiences, myself included, I had all the future events when I was younger. Possibilities of future events, potentiality of what could happen in a certain timeline. So I think that's very common now. We all have that understanding. It's not unusual. It's not amazing. It's just quite normal. Actually, it's been normalized. And I think also with the Mantis beings as well at the time. And obviously, I'm not going to ask your age now. That when you were 9. But there's at the time back in the day, there wasn't a reality to open anyone up to find out who these mantis beings were, or in fact that they were mantis. It's only in hindsight or later down the line that you get an understanding of who these beings were. So it's an early age to have such an experience, Robert.
I suppose. I mean, there's a lot of. You're familiar with Mary Rodwell and a lot of the other literature that talks about young children being born with exceptional abilities, having experiences like that. So I think that was, I guess I was pretty early on as far as having those kinds of experiences. I don't know too many other people who had experiences back in the 50s and 60s. So I'm dating myself here of that kind. But I did later on in middle school, there was a friend of mine who started talking about having had similar experiences. And we never linked it up to see if they were exactly at the same time or not, but they were around the same time. And he also had these visions of nuclear war, of an attack by China, which was kind of ironic back then because everyone was worried about Russia. And that's why I've been kind of following China for the last 40 plus years, 50 plus years, to see, what's developing there. And you can see that pattern, that timeline possibly developing. And I'll come back to this, but later on I met a client. I'm a psychotherapist by profession, and I met a client who had similar experiences. But that experience stands out. I don't know if that I was naturally inclined to an interest in the paranormal and UFOs and spiritual matters. I think I was. I recall reading books about karma and reincarnation when I was in 5th grade, and trying to strike up a conversation with my peers about it. And
What age were you? In America, what is 5th grade? What age were you?
4th, 5th grade is 10 or 11.
Okay.
So it was right after those events. I started reading in middle school. I started reading John Keel and Jacques Vallée and some of the UFO researchers who linked the UFO phenomena to the paranormal, fairy folk, and that whole broadening of the topic. In high school, some peers of mine had an experience with like a Mothman character.
Really?
That experience stands out. I was not part of that. But I was reading John Keel's book on the Mothman prophecies around that time. And there were these sightings of this Mothman type creature in an industrial area in where I grew up, like a light industrial area. And apparently there was a history of sightings there. And a bunch of high school kids went and tried to surround him or it or whatever. And he picked one up and threw them against the fence. And after that, no one wanted to talk about it. So I never had a chance to kind of investigate it. Everyone was just scared out of their wits and didn't want to talk about it. So that experience stands out. I think those experiences too are more common than people realize, those interactions that humanoid beings.
Yeah, I think they're more common as well than people want to even bring into their memory. It's something that most people just shut it down until there's a safe space or a time where you feel it's okay to talk about it. So yeah, it's a very, I mean, I've never seen a Mothman. I don't think I'd want to see a Mothman at all. Just, you know, but I do remember, I am of similar age to you, Robert, and I do remember, I am aware of what you're speaking of. But these experiences, do you think, from such a young age as well, like I do relate to the sound, what you were talking about, like when you heard sound, like you were tuning into this reality of timeline. Do you think all of that was the basis for you to eventually go through psychotherapy, the area that you went into? Do you think, was there any more leading up to the point where you made that decision to become a psychotherapist?
It's hard for me to believe they're not related. Well, I think that those experiences opened me up, whether I was open already or not. They certainly opened me up to the unusual or the paranormal. So I've always had an interest in that. In college, I started becoming interested in being a psychotherapist. Initially, my interest was in history and political science, and I wanted to work for the State Department and nuclear disarmament. I mean, I had, you know, a typical high school kind of a vision of helping humanity. But then I got interested in psychology. I had some interesting dreams that foreshadowed that. One was just pictures of people kind of flashing before me saying, "You will help us," you know, which was kind of interesting. So that, I think that was kind of foreshadowed. In college, I'm skipping a little bit ahead now.
Okay.
I was reading The Center of the Cyclone by John Lilly, which you may be familiar with him in terms of dolphin research, the consciousness research. And I had a spontaneous experience with a friend named Leo, where we both just looked in each other's eyes for no apparent reason. We each saw like a halo or a lot of energy around each other. I seemed to be the one who initiated it for some reason. But then I had a vision of some past life experience with him, which was very, it was very odd. Later on, I had a telepathic, the two of us had some weird connections. We definitely had some karma together. I was at his house and he decided to send me a telepathic message and I heard his voice. So that was another set of experiences. After that, shortly after having that experience with him, I read in The Center of the Cyclone of the Sufi eye exercise, where you look into the eyes of somebody else and you see your past lives. So then I started to experiment with that because I thought that was cool, you know, being 19 years old and, you know, and people would see the same faces. And speaking of being a medium, I think I could be a medium if I wanted to. I think I have that kind of ability. I haven't really developed that. I don't think it's necessary for me to.
I mean, I would come in there and say, and Chris would agree, everyone's a medium. If it's on your path to go into that, you'll go into it. But everyone's got these innate, you can call them gifts if you want. I mean, I've never gone on platform. I'm so not interested. I'm more of a rescue medium. I've done that all my life. So, and some people they're amazing mediums and they're just not interested to go and practice it at all. So it's good that you can recognize, isn't it, Chris, when you can recognize you've got them abilities. They're just innate of who you truly are.
The gift itself is about self-discovery anyway. So
yeah,
that's the whole purpose of being a medium. Even though you communicate with different energies, truly you communicate with yourself. So you're getting an understanding of you to help the collective. So it's just a different way. It brings you into it because spirit bring you into it. So, and different events bring you into experiences, but it's still the same process as someone who, like yourself, who's had the mantis that's been there and visited them. It's still similarities. It's just a different format, I suppose, to
different experience. Same. So it's just like, you know, the orange analogy. Human experiences, but we all experience it differently. So I wouldn't say I think I could be. You just know you are. That's what I say. Anyway, I cut you off because I found that interesting to bring that up, because many people say, "Well, I think I could be," and I just say, "Well, you are already." If you choose to use that, just do it. Just Sorry, go on.
That makes sense to me. But one reason why I brought that up was I would feel when I was doing these eye exercises, I would feel my body change. I would feel some transformation going on. People would see the same faces. People I was close to, friends, girlfriend, they would see the same faces, which is kind of interesting. I did have a negative experience with that once, where I lost sense of consciousness and self, and it was a kind of a very scary possession kind of experience. So after that, I kind of learned my lesson that this is something you don't just play around with. Like Ouija boards and such. So, most of those experiences were interesting. I wouldn't say they were positive or negative, except for this one. But those college experiences, you know, just continue to build and deepen my interest in spirituality and the paranormal. I actually had a professor who was open to this stuff, and I wrote an independent study on UFOs when I was in college. I actually got college credit for it, which was nice. And that was kind of the basis for some research that I did and later published in the 90s. I kind of got out of the UFO field. I just felt like nothing new was really being said or coming out for a good 20 years or more. But I did publish a short piece, and it's a Bulletin of Anomalous Experience in 1994 that kind of got into some of the research I was doing on Gurdjieff and UFOs and Julian Jaynes, Robert Temple's A Serious Mystery, kind of linking a lot of phenomena. I wasn't interested I hadn't read Steiner at that point, by the way. That came later. But then by late 80s, I was working in psychology. I started out working with the chronically mentally ill, people who were being released from mental hospitals with schizophrenia and psychotic disorders, trying to help them transition to the community, which was a very, very compelling kind of work, very fulfilling, difficult at times. And I definitely noticed, staying on this topic, that there were individuals who could express a connection with other realities. The idea, I mean, the scientific paradigm now is to reduce all that, you know, to some biochemical imbalance in the brain and so forth. And I do believe there's a disease process, if you want to call it that. But when you look at Native American Aboriginal communities, they would integrate people that we would call psychotic into the shamanic practices, you know, because they do see into other realities. Some of it is their own hallucinatory activity. Some of it, I think, they see things that are, in a sense, are really there that other people can't. So I
agree. It's I think there's a fine line with the schizophrenia, because obviously, as you know, when I was a young teenager, because I went around telling everyone I was seeing dead people, I was diagnosed with schizophrenia. And the fact that you get this label is so detrimental to the being as it's developing anyway. And the fact that it does shut down the reality. So I can understand why someone who, just to stay on the fact, you know, seeing dead people, and once it's shut down and you're told you're crazy, you know how the psychology of the mind works, the belief systems, then I think it then would become illusionary, and then it would expand into I don't know how to do it, you know, like there is a word that I can't find, but you know what I'm trying to say. So they are actually experiencing these beings, but once society shuts them down and then labels them schizophrenic, you're crazy, you're this, you're that, and all the rest of it, you need help, then that in itself, you can extrapolate from that, that would cause illusionary blood to carry on. I can't say it as good as you because I'm not a psychotherapist, but you understand what I'm trying to put across.
Yeah, I mean that's
important.
That's a horrible diagnosis to give someone who's not schizophrenic, who clearly isn't. You know.
Yes.
I think mental health systems have come a ways in terms of treatment and care, but I think there's a lot of validity to the idea that there is a role for the spirit world in mental health. And of course, that sounds, you know, completely outside of the current paradigms and sounds crazy and so forth. But for thousands of years in every culture, that was the belief. And, you know, modern scientism kind of looks at it as, you know, naive kind of, you know, fairy tale.
Do you deal with that, Robert? Can I ask you, you know, with your clients, so when you have clients come in and they raise these areas of other beings, how does that work with you? I mean, obviously you've had your spiritual journey, you've had your own personal experiences. So do you feel that, I mean, I'm just going to throw it out there. Do you feel all your personal experiences before with other beings or entities has allowed you to become the psychotherapist that you should be, but your clients that come in with, I'm seeing a mantrist being, you know, my mum says I'm mad or something like that. Does that make sense to you?
Not on a steady basis. I mean, there have been a few people who kind of dedicated their practices to working with experiencers or people who have paranormal experiences. That hasn't been my focus, but people do come in with that. I've had one person who was an abductee, and he had experiences similar to what I had when he was younger, very similar. I briefly worked with him, and then he moved out west, unfortunately. So I only had a few sessions with him. I've come across a couple of people who are connected to MK Ultra or something similar. One claimed he was the illegitimate son of British royalty, and that he had done some testing. He had, what is that illness that the royal family has? Porphyry or?
I can't pronounce it, so don't even ask me. That's what I just say.
I'm probably not pronouncing it correctly, but he did have or claimed that he had that illness, you know, which is.
We've lost Chris. We've lost Chris. That's okay. Keep going. Do go on.
Well, okay. I don't know what happened there, but he claimed that he was the illegitimate son of British royalty. He was raised in a Canadian hospital where he underwent systematic torture, and he became a multiple personality. At that time, I knew nothing about MK Ultra. I knew nothing about the work of Corey Hammond, who's a hypnotherapy expert in the States, who's done a lot of work with MK Ultra victims. So later on, again, that's another example of being able to piece that together. Later on, I had a couple of other clients who were, I seem to be a magnet for unusual clients. Let's put it that way. Which is, again, not surprising. So I had a few other people who've had some very interesting connections with outside intelligences, and also at least one with the intelligence community. I'm working with an autistic person now who has had what he calls false memories. He's been convinced that they're false memories. I'm not so sure, but that's not the focus of my work with him.
No.
So I don't really make that the focus, but I definitely think I practice much more on an intuitive level. Of course, you use concepts, you use different therapeutic approaches, but I work much more on an intuitive level with people. And that I think that's why I'm effective, more so than anything else.
Yeah.
So I guess I'll come back to my practice, because there's a few more things I wanted to say about what I'm doing now.
Yeah.
But as far as spiritual, kind of sort of my spiritual history, another aspect of this was getting married to my college sweetheart, and we're still married. And in 1995, my daughter. Well, let me back up. In 1982, my father died, and I was in graduate school then. I was actually about to give a talk on the unconscious, which is interesting. The next day, and he passed away that night, and I had a distinct feeling of sadness, of loss. The following morning, I found out that he had passed. At the same time, my girlfriend, who later became my wife, had a vision of him coming to her with a baby, holding a baby in his hands, saying, "We're family." And later on, Jennifer, who's my wife, identified. She remembered the picture. She remembered the outfit. And later on, my daughter had a similar outfit.
Wow.
So that experience stands out. I actually spoken to Sharon Rowlett. I don't know if you're familiar with her. She wrote a book called Coincidences.
I'm not familiar, no.
That's a wonderful book that gets into the nature of synchronicity, coincidences, the role of other intelligences, the role of our higher self. It's an academic book. That's like 600 pages. But she does a wonderful job of exploring that whole terrain. I spoke to her about this story. Maybe that'll be in one of her books in the future. But one thing that she does is collect a lot of these stories. So that kind of stands out. My daughter is in many ways a sensitive. She's a physical therapist. She works with disabled children. She would occasionally see fairies or elementals. She once saw behind a classmate in school this young girl, and asked. She was stunned by it because it was a vision that came and went. And it turned out this fellow's younger sister had passed a few years ago. So she was clearly seeing the ghost, specter, whatever of
mediumship.
She's very talented in that way. But like myself, she's not diving into that, and where that's the focus of her practice. She just started out, just finished her doctorate, and just started out. She's 25, and she's working with disabled kids, but she does tune into. She sees beyond the physical disabilities. Some of these people can't speak. And like anyone who's really talented in that field, she's able to tap into what's going on underneath.
I
don't know if you ever saw the
movie.
That's
where the innate gifts we speak that we all have, where they come into play, whatever profession, purpose, whatever, they will come into play exactly the way they should. So again, the orange analogy is just a different way of expressing this gift. Do go on. It's fascinating.
That's I don't know how much more I can add to that.
Well, I mean, I was just saying I'm waiting for the lead up that we go into Steiner, all the research that you've done before, because we need to bring Steiner to the table, and see if we can you can give the audience a greater understanding of Steiner. Obviously, guys, I was introduced to Steiner via Robert when we first connected a few months ago. And I've been fascinated ever since. It's just especially in the context of current times. So where was you first introduced to Steiner? When was that?
My first introduction actually was in college when Owen Barfield, who was one of the Inklings, he was friends with Tolkien and C.S. Lewis and Charles Williams, came to speak about Steiner at Drew University, which is the school I went to. He was a follower, I guess you could say, of Steiner, very much a believer in his work. And I kind of stored it away. I didn't pursue Steiner. I was interested in Gurdjieff. I read up on Crowley, some of the other occultists, and obviously UFOs. But I started picking up Steiner again about, when was it? Maybe 12 years ago. and I just became immediately fascinated. I started reading more about his books about nature, his writings, his lectures about nature, about bees, elementals. I mean, he long ago talked about the earth being a living being. There's so much that in his writings that foreshadows later concepts like morphic fields and so forth. But what struck me most was his emphasis on thinking. I remember thinking to myself that, you know, we talk about feelings, we talk about putting out good intentions, but what about thinking? Like, what does that build? What does that create in the universe? And especially something that's kind of infused with soul. And then I came across that in Steiner, and I was like, wow, that's exactly what I was thinking. Or that's kind of where I was at that time. And one of the major things he talks about is the importance of thought, but thought that's infused with emotion, that's infused with soul, not the kind of the dry, arid thinking of modern science. So that kind of drew me into Steiner. Then I started reading about Ahriman. I started reading about his prophecies or predictions of future patterns in human history. And then I connected it up to the UFO phenomena, because the beings that he talks about as Ahrimanic beings in particular line up with a lot of the beings that are mentioned in the UFO phenomena. The connection with artificial intelligence. He talked about man-machine mergers over 100 years ago, and the potential dangers of that, and the role that this being Ahriman, who comes from a non-spatial realm, comes from the atomic realm, his role in modeling and driving human history right now, and the dangers of the man-machine merger. And again, he talked about this over 120 years ago, when you know we didn't have computers, we barely had we didn't have pocket calculators then.
No. And it just, if I could just say that, it's quite obvious where he got his information, and it's got to be on the sort of same foundation of where yourself you've spoken about, where we've seen possible future events that could occur. So obviously Steiner was an experiencer of some description. In his case, the information obtained, he put it down and wrote it to share with humanity. So, you know, people say, well, how can someone, I've a similar discussion the other day, someone living, you know, a couple of 100 years ago, how could they know this? Well, exactly how the experiences we're having now, yourself, me, and everybody, and where we're shown the potentiality of the human experience, where it could go. It's just happened to Steiner way back then. It's the same thing. And it became his truth. So he expressed it out. And I've read your paper on Steiner, and you couldn't get more accurate. Apart from some terminologies, then it's just so with the context of current times. Amazing work.
Yeah, I think the anthroposophical community, and Steiner was the founder of anthroposophy, and his organizations have continued throughout the world. I've connected with them. I presented at a conference this August. I'm publishing that paper, a revised kind of lengthened version of that paper in their journal. So I'm not an anthroposophist. I'm not a card-carrying anthroposophist, but I've started to develop connections with that community. And there's a certain segment of the community that are very interested in this whole, connection with UFO phenomena. The other interesting part, which I've really only developed in the last year, really studied in the last year, is connecting all of this to karma, to reincarnation, to Mary Rodwell's work on the alphabet children, which connects back to my practice. I work a lot with people with ADHD and OCD. Yeah. And they're all universally empathic people. And they're pretty much universally gifted people. Now, some of them have had paranormal experiences, but again, that's not something that I if they talk about it, I work with it. Yeah. I don't give them questionnaires about it or explore that. That's not my purpose. But I was fascinated with the connection between all these different different streams in my life, working with these empaths and sensitives, coming across a higher frequency, I think, of paranormal experiences amongst them. Reading Rodwell's work, which connects it to the UFO phenomena, the hybridization of man, which is something Steiner talked about. In 1919, he lectured about how if human evolution doesn't go in the right direction, we're going to be forced to share the earth with hybrid beings.
Yes, yeah.
Of a lower quality, I guess you could say, lower development.
Yeah.
They would be beings that were part of an automatic consciousness. He described it as a kind of a web. He used the word web, spider web. And much like the Hopi Indians, I think he was trying to describe what we would call the internet today, or the internet of all things.
Yeah.
So that's a fascinating article to read, especially when you look at it in the context of the UFO literature on hybridization, the idea that David Jacobs and Bud Hopkins have talked about, which is more of a negative scenario of humanity being forced to share the planet with some alien beings. That was one possible timeline for humanity. The other was to move towards a world. Again, this connects with the alphabet people, a world of empaths, a world where everyone felt everyone else's feelings, where no one could go to sleep at night. If someone was suffering, everyone would know it. A kind of an organic singularity. And this is a point that I keep trying to make, is that it's important to understand that this electronic artificial singularity will lead to the enslavement of man in a robotic consciousness, where it's like the Borg in Star Trek. There's an organic singularity which connects us at a soul level, where it's a world of sympathy, compassion, and empathy. It's not this automatic, digital world where we're essentially robots, or we're kind of like Westworld. I don't know if you've ever seen that TV show.
Yeah. I don't watch it, but I'm aware of it. Yeah.
Westworld is talk about predictive programming. Westworld and Stranger Things are two programs that people should watch to understand. I think they're predictive programming, particularly Westworld, in terms of creating these robots who have all these life narratives and eventually break out into the so-called real world, which is controlled by a computer. It's fascinating. This is what Steiner talked about as potentially happening, and the UFO literature lines up perfectly with it.
I mean, we do. I mean, there's evidence already of AI. I mean, I personally think in the context of the hybrids you're talking about, they've been here in this timeline for a very, very long time already, and they're so integrated that you wouldn't be aware that they're there. And I think the only time that you could really maybe identify them, I mean, it's just coming from what I play around with. I don't go into it, it's not really, but I'm aware of it. I've had to be, because of the experiences. I was also shown the consciousness being transferred into the human, and the possibilities of that. So I've had it in the background. I'm aware that it's there, but it's like this, that these hybrids of that description, the AI, if they're programmed to follow an instruction within the social context of humanity, depending how many you've got. So, i.e., whoever says you must do this, you must do that, you'd think they were just like human beings. And they would stand up and they would enforce that. They didn't. It's like there's a hypnosis where the free will has been taken away, or choice. Does that make sense to you, what I just said?
That's kind of what I'm delving into right now in terms of Steiner's theories of karma and reincarnation, other theories of karma and reincarnation. The idea that the evolution of man is being altered by these alien interventions. And it seems like some beings are trying to help us, and some beings are have a different agenda. So I don't think it's all negative.
No, I mean, I don't think it's negative, because obviously, I come from my truth,
Right.
Everything is consciousness experiencing, and if consciousness chooses to experience that on a singularity basis, or a group collective, then that's fine. It's just my individual choice whether I choose it or not myself, which is a no. Thank you. But yeah, do go on, Robert. Do go on.
Yeah, I think that the other aspect of Steiner is the occult concept of the eighth sphere, which was first disclosed in the late 19th century by Sinnott and Blavatsky. And Sinnott, a lot of what he talked about was incorrect. Steiner and Blavatsky later corrected him, but basically they kind of started to spill the beans about this other place where humans, it's hard to explain, but it's sort of the byproduct of human life and thought goes to and is then alchemically transformed. And there are benevolent beings and malevolent beings in that realm. But it's from there that Steiner was aware of early UFO phenomena, and he said that they came from the eighth sphere, which is just an interesting side note. He mentioned that in the 20s. But that whole concept of the eighth sphere is something I'm studying quite a bit, because it has a lot to do with who is reincarnating, why they're reincarnating, and a battle between, almost like a Tolkien-esque battle between good and evil.
Yeah.
And again, there's different levels of looking at that, as you know. I mean, it's not. Steiner didn't believe there was pure evil. He believed that there were beings that were hindrances to human development and had their own agendas. Much like if you go into a forest, you have trees fighting over terrain. You have animals fighting over terrain.
Yeah. I mean, when I'd like to come in and say, we're going sort of really deep into this one, but in the timeline that we're in and what we're experiencing, you're going to have polarities everywhere. You're going to have the scenario, black and white, up and down, good and evil. It's the polarity of the experiences that we're in. So it follows, even in Steiner's terminology of it, you're going to have the polarity of good and evil. You're going to have it. It has to play its role, even there.
Yeah, and a lot of that depends on your perspective. I mean, we do horrible things to each other. We do horrible things to animals. We're not. Other beings could see us as these malevolent beings, but based on a lot of our behavior, I mean, clearly. Yeah. So it's not so black. It isn't black and white by any means.
No, it's not. I have a theory that it's just, I say it very lightheartedly, as you know, is that, if ET would not invade us, they must go past thinking you're the cruelest, despicable, sentient beings I've ever seen, what you do to not only your animals, but to your fellow beings. I mean, what a planet we are. So I think it needs to be put into perspective, when and I think you need to have that background of understanding when you look at the likes of Steiner, because he does go deep. But the fact I'm aware, we've got exactly the same. So it's not, I've got a higher pedestal, I'm not going to come down and judge, if that makes sense to you. Yeah. Sorry, do go on. No, I find it fascinating. I just find it.
Yeah, I think that's right on target. None of this is so simplistic. Speaking of that, I think that there are forces, political forces, and occult forces that are trying to polarize the world into black versus white, Democrat versus Republican in the States, poor versus rich. Steiner talked about eventually a war of all versus all that occult forces are trying to create, where everyone would be polarized, balkanized, where you'd have this battle, this devastating battle of humanity. And I think he saw that far into the future. But one thing anthroposophists have talked about is how things seem to have speeded up since Steiner's death in 1924. I think 24, 25 he died. I think it was 24. And how what he predicted would happen 200-300 years from now is happening now, or is on the verge of happening now. So that whole polarization, I think, is being fed by, I think they're negative forces, kind of left-handed forces that are interested in power and control, who are trying to pit people against each other. So that's just an aside, but it's another aspect of Steiner that he predicted, a long time ago, that one of the gravest threats to humanity would be this this polarization, this battle of good versus evil.
Yeah, I mean, you've got to look at, I mean, having an understanding of the reality we're in, the 3D reality, even if you come just from quantum physics 101, it doesn't really matter which way it is. This experience in this reality is polarities, and that's what it's down to. And at some point, the polarities become extreme, but they always seem to become extreme, and maybe perceived as a negative experience, but it's like one part of it is pushing the other to evolve. Like, this has been going on for so long. Evolve, have some more. Do you make that choice to evolve your consciousness or the collective or whatever terminology? And I think that if you look back in history, you can see aspects of this where the whole world has gone into, you know, we just got to look at World War I, World War II, you know, things like that. And when you look back in hindsight, which we all say is a bitch because you never see it before, but now what's happening, we are starting to see before. But when you look back, you say, well, out of that came such evolutionary change to mankind. From that, you understand it's not that. Yeah, I know sometimes when we have such extreme polarities as we got now, it can be scary, it can be fearful, but you just know, if you've studied any history of humanity, something, well, coming from my truth, it's gonna, if you choose it, the better, the evolution is coming, and it has to get harder or maybe more negative, if I want to use that terminology, to push you to shift and make that change. On Steiner, I'm not one for giving end of the world scenarios or end of anything scenarios. I mean, for me, it's all possibilities at all times in one timeline. So anything could happen depending on reality I choose. So that's me. But did Steiner sort of like roll it all up at the end and sort of say, you know, any advice to us lot 100 and odd years down the line, what we should be doing?
You know, what he emphasized was the importance of consciousness, the importance of individual development of consciousness. He criticized any sort of programmatic solutions to humanity, you know, some political movement. He just saw them all as ephemeral, really, and not really getting to the root of it, which is our individual development. He spoke about how there'd be a time when most people on the earth would see good as evil and evil as good. And it was the responsibility of people who are kind of aware to sort of accept that and kind of love them anyway, you know, as he put it. I think his exact quote was to be two types of people in the world: those who see good as evil, and those or evil as good, and those who would love them. So I think that there's this a large part of the population is caught up in the narrative, the fear narrative, and we, you know, this is standard conspiracy theory.
I mean, that's quite spot on, isn't it? I mean, to say there'd be a large part of people that would see evil as good, that's spot on today. I mean,
it's precisely spot on.
Be going, hello, do you see what's happening? And they're going, yeah, it's good. And you're like, what? So it's like illogical, so to speak. It's like something switched. It's so there is something.
Our narratives through education, through the media, through political discourse, such as it is, there's so many forces that are pushing us to see the world a certain way, and there are intelligence communities that are connected to occult movements that are driving this. Whether it's the KGB, the CIA, all the the other alphabet people. The
other ones.
And I don't think everyone in those systems is malevolent by any means, but there is clearly an effort to create a narrative that limits human consciousness.
I'm sorry, Robert. Yeah, go on.
I was going to say, speaking about the UFO phenomena, I think that a lot of people, ufologists, have speculated that one thing they're trying to create is this false alien invasion thing. that's our newest enemy that, that they're going to use to manipulate people. Most UFOs now, I think, are man-made. They're advanced technologies that have never been disclosed. There's so much secretive stuff going on. The MK Ultra mind control stuff did not end when the Church Committee in the 70s. It's continued in a different form. You can see so much symbolism and manipulation in the media, so much predictive programming in movies. So there's definitely this narrative that's being created where people think this is all wonderful. Now, nanotechnology is wonderful. It can help with disease processes. Having like a cyborg could allow people who cannot walk to walk. So there is a positive side to this, or potentially is a positive side to all this technology. But I think a lot of it's being sold as it's being sold as something wonderful. But people aren't looking behind the mirror and seeing, well, we're also heading towards a society where a lot of our freedoms are taken away, where there's this, we're going to be linked with machines in this sort of automatic Borg consciousness. That's sort of the worst case scenario. But Steiner emphasized to battle that you don't have to get involved in some political movement, because those political movements have their own dialectic. They always turn into their opposite. They're not very effective. It's more about the conscious development of each individual.
Yeah. No, I hear you. I mean, it's really relevant. I mean, you know me, and I throw out, I have 2 or 3 analogies for everything. I've got a new analogy because as to me, it's really shifting fast. And what I do now, I just to try and understand, or to try and fracture this illusion, what's going on with the control, is I now state, okay, I want you for 72 hours, turn off your TV, turn off your news, don't talk to anybody that talks about what's going on outside. Turn off that reality, no external, and get your Android phone out or your video camera and film your reality, your family, your arguments with your kids or your neighbors, going to the shop, you're going for a walk, film where you're going, when you're talking to someone, having a giggle, film that, because that is your reality you're in now. You're not in the reality on the screen or on the media, you're not in the reality you're being told on the screen that you are in. Go 72 hours, just experience your own reality. After 72 hours, turn on the news and see, well, you'll know that's not my reality. I don't experience that. It's like it's a switch. Because you can see, and it reminds me of a film, and I can't remember the name because my brain it just loses everything. But I remember seeing a film years ago, a very old school film, because me and you are on the similar age. And it was a film when this man put the glasses on, he saw the truth on the adverts. Do you know the one I'm talking about? On the billboard. Yeah. In America. So he put the glasses on, or it was something. I saw it. Put the glasses on, and then he would see what was really being said. And then if he took the glasses off, it was saying, I love you, but it really wasn't, I love you. So, and it reminds me of then. And of course, I don't have a TV, and I haven't had a TV for donkey's years. Only the kids had it for their programs. But when I do go and look, I just sit to see what is going on outside the door. I see it like that. It's not the reality I'm in. There's no division in my reality at the moment between neighbors, community, friends, when I travel, when I go shopping, when I meet up. There's no division. There's no polarity. There's no one against anybody doing anything. In fact, what's on the TV news is not even spoke about in my reality between the people in the shops. I went shopping yesterday, laughing and joking, and bought my grandson a big digger thing to sit in. And it's not what I'm seeing on the news. Does that make sense to you? So
absolutely, yeah. So
for me, I say turn it off for 3 days and go and experience your own reality. So and to have the recognition, I think that Steiner gives some really good pointers towards it that maybe not in a direct way that I'm going to state it, but that's how I read it for me, is that you're experiencing your reality. You not only can you not force it upon someone else, you don't have to take on their reality. How illogical is that? You know, if you're in you're in America and I'm here, I can't take on your reality, can I? For the Zoom screen, because I'm not experiencing it. So, does that make sense to you, Robert?
Yeah, I think there's 7.5 billion people in the world. Each of us experiences things a bit differently.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I like what you're saying as far as just focusing on your own life. Don't get caught up in all of these abstractions and and I'm not saying not to get involved in politics or not to get involved in activism. I mean, I'm involved in some environmental activism myself, so I'm not saying just sit back in your chair and meditate. But be aware that one thing I tell my clients is that there's a difference between the sphere of worry and the sphere of influence. What you can really influence is just yourself and maybe some people around you. Your sphere of worry in this modern society is always filled with fear, terrorist attacks, wars, COVID. I mean, all this stuff is, so much of it is, not that there aren't real things to be afraid of, but a lot of this is being engineered.
Yeah.
So
I'm with you.
Helping people just focus on, okay, talk to your neighbor, talk to your family, enjoy nature, enjoy animals, get outside, live an organic life, versus all of this virtual reality nonsense.
I always say, go and speak to your neighbor or say, how are you? What do you do? Get connected. I mean, obviously, in my reality, it is connected because there is no polarity anywhere. I've seen nothing in my reality, or when I go out, I went out yesterday even for a social event. There was no polarities at all. My reality and those I'm sharing it with is not reflected in the media and the papers. It is not. That is not my reality. So why would I want to? Does that make sense? For me, then it becomes illogical. So, and I thought, well, the only way I could get that across is to say, well, just turn off your TV for 3 days and go and have your own experience. Just shut it all down.
Or if you're watching TV, see it as one source of information. See it as one.
Yeah, not the only source. Well done, Robert. Yeah.
Not the only source, and you have competing sources.
Yeah.
And keep your own counsel about things and focus on your life, because that's really all we have is our life. And again, maybe we can influence the people closest to us. That's it.
Yeah, that's it. That's it.
Robert.
Oh, sorry, I was interrupting you. I'm just looking at the time. We're coming to the close.
Okay.
I mean, Robert, it's just been a fascinating journey for you, obviously. And I would love to have got a lot more out of you, but we don't have the time. We would have gone on a few hours, okay? But thank you for sharing your spiritual journey today. And I learned some things about you today. I thought I knew about you, but I hadn't heard before. So that was really interesting. So thank you for sharing that. And thank you for touching on Steiner. If people are interested in Steiner and, to learn more about him, where can they get hold of you? Can they find you anywhere, or email or whatever? Is there anything you can to get more information, or is there a society to direct them to that you think could help them?
Well, the Anthroposophical Society is all over the place. It's actually very strong in England. There's a very well-developed branch in England. You can email me at hamletsmill, HAMLETSMILL @msn.com. And I'd be happy to communicate. I've had a number of anthroposophists or people interested in anthroposophy start to connect with me and chat and write back and forth about Steiner. So, but I'd like to broaden it. I'd like to broaden my connection beyond the anthroposophical community. So
I think it's time for. I agree. I think this should be integrated into other areas. So, I think that's a broader area to go into with this. And Well, on that note, I'm going to thank you. I'm not going to send you to the naughty room while I close the show. For those that have come on and said, well, where is Chris? I don't know what happened to Chris. We lost Chris a bit earlier on. The screen went blank. He was in a cupboard somewhere in the universe, so I don't know what's happened. So I'm sure he'll be back next week. He'll definitely be back next week. And talking on next week we will be streaming live at 8:30 p.m. UK time, because we have the one and only Rob Gothia from United States of America channeling Ardith and Treb. It's really exciting for me and Chris for this one, because we get to ask some questions. So I'm really looking forward to that. I know Chris is more so. And on that note, I'd like to thank everyone for watching our show this evening. And until next Sunday, 8:30 p.m. Thank you, Robert, once again. And thank you, everybody, for watching the show. And it's bye for now.